So once again, thanks for attending our session today, From Manual to Humanual Testing, applying design thinking principles to software quality engineering. So today's agenda, we're going to take a look at what is Humanual testing. It's a term that you may not be familiar with. It's certainly something that we'd like to see you become more familiar with. It's certainly the industry as a whole to become more familiar with as well. During today's session, we'll talk about evolving the tester and why Humanual testing is an upskill and it's an evolution in a quality engineering organization. We'll also look at specifically 3 human-centered testing techniques, and then the design thinking game changer. What is design thinking? It's a term, again, that you may have heard quite a bit, as there have been a number of presentations at conferences around design thinking. We'll dive into that a bit more, but also specifically, how does design thinking relate to testing and QA? And then at the end, we'll have an open discussion and a Q&A. So for those of you that are attending live, again, please feel free to enter questions in during the course of the conversation today. Otherwise, we will tackle those at the end. So really quick, a little more on us. I'm Kirk Walton. I'm the Vice President here at tapQA. I've been in the IT services field for over 20 years and very excited to bring these service offerings and these techniques to our client base. I mean, we've certainly worked with a number of clients that have appreciated the work that we do from a strategy standpoint, and also bringing these capabilities to them, being able to implement these into your processes. So excited to be a part of that. All about the goal of making better software, of course. And then Josh, I'll turn this over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Kirk, and good afternoon, everybody. So I am Josh Brenneman, the Delivery and Talent Director here at tapQA. That involves, at this point, being involved in a lot of our milestones and a lot of the projects that we do across our organization. And of course, the training and upskilling in talent for our consultants, which I love. I love the work that I do now. Before this, I was a long-term consultant in the testing and test leadership space. A lot of different companies, a lot of different methodologies I've been fortunate to be a part of. So I try and bring that perspective into these kind of conversations.
Great, thanks, Josh. And Josh is actually, during the course of this week, has been doing a design thinking training session for one of our clients too. So appreciate taking the time today to do this webinar as well, Josh.
Yeah.
So really quick, what is Humanual testing? So that's a term that, again, you may not be familiar with. We want to level set exactly what we're referring to when we say Humanual testing. So it's a term that we coined one day, or we're kind of thinking about, like, what is the evolution of a manual tester? And certainly, as we discussed before the presentation, manual testing has gotten kind of a bad rap over the last few years, which is really, really unfortunate because it is such a critical component to successful software development and software delivery. And I feel like that has been generated by the advances in technology when it comes to quality engineering. So advances in automation, we've seen it very recently, of course, more advances with AI and what that means for the manual testing role. And I think there's this perception that potentially the manual testing role could go away. And we say that is hogwash. Absolutely not. And manual testing is such an important and critical skill, but the manual tester does need to evolve as well. And we see this as kind of the next step in manual testing, where it's really turning the focus on just finding defects and, and turning that focus to a more human-centered approach, and really having a keen eye for what the user is looking for and what the user is going to be happy with. So as we've brought these processes more here to tapQA and to our clients, we came up with the term Humanual testing because it's really, the focus is more on the human. So it's testing applications from the lens of our end users. A quick question for our attendees, and this is something that, feel free to enter it into the chat room again, but does anyone know who said the human is more important than the technology? Make things more human. And if you saw our recent blog post, you might know the answer to this, but if not, we'll see what people say. So again, the human is more important than the technology. Make things more human.
I think I'll offer up just maybe a bit of a clue. So this individual turned 70 recently, if that helps. bring any more names to forefront here.
All right, so so the answer to this is Steve Wozniak, and he is, of course, the co-founder of Apple. And we did get one correct answer in our chat room, so Philip, thank you. And Steve, of course, or I should say Apple. I mean, when you think about usable software, I mean, Apple certainly should be at the top of your list, absolutely. So Humanual testing, I mean, as we keep the end user and usable software in mind, it's a paradigm shift in how software quality teams approach testing and measure success. So it's not about just catching code defects. It's not about just checking boxes. It's not about covering requirements. Those are certainly critical functions of the QA team, and will always remain that way. But automation is going to do more of that, and that frees up the quality assurance professionals to use our empathy and our analytical skills and the human factors that you just can't automate, and take that to the next level. So that's kind of an introduction is what is Humanual testing. Josh, you have quite a bit more on what Humanual testing is, and of course what it also is not.
Yeah. So let's get going on that. Not to pound this point home too many times, but just really wanted to be clear on this goal, up front going into this whole presentation before we get into tips and tricks and design thinking. Just really wanted to define this really clearly, because that was definitely some interest from our attendees as well. So let's get through the is. We feel that Humanual testing is a collection of user-centric testing techniques, but it's more than techniques and more than methods. Okay, it's a mindset that is empathetic and puts the person first, but it also is grounded in reality and has to be practical. So it is founded in the principles of design thinking, and we're going to be talking a lot more about that coming up. But just we want to give all the credit we can to we're taking a lot of design thinking mindset and ideology and converting it for our more centered focus that we're doing here with Humanual. So we also view it as an evolution of thought, that the QA folks become the advocate for the customer, which is, again, a bit of a paradigm shift in how QA folks are normally tasked, but a very important evolution. We also want to recognize that there are components of Humanual testing that's useful for both the automators on the team and for manual testers. We're really big into collaboration and what each side can kind of bring to the mix. We don't need another division of labor in the QA teams. We have enough of that already with kind of the technical and non-technical kind of focuses. But Humanual testing, getting customer empathy, get the right mindsets, and some of these techniques can definitely cross the borders, the organizational. So sometimes when we think about, what is something, it's also helpful to think about, what it is not. So let's get into that a little bit. Humanual testing is not a model with a prescribed process, and it's not a stage of testing. We're not laying out this great new idea that right after sit, but before end to end, we're going to introduce a new layer. I mean, there are pieces you could do that way if it makes sense, but that would be limiting of what we're talking about here to define it that way as a stage. We also don't see it as just a nice to have, if there's time, because we know how this works. There isn't really ever time, right? So it's more of a mindset that we feel needs to be adopted because of its importance. And that's why we want to make sure we define it that way. So it's not a stage of testing. We covered that. It's an evolution of testing. So we've recognized and come to accept that there's a lot of progress and evolution of test automation, right? We've changed from heavy license tools into open source frameworks, and now a lot more shifting toward AI tools and machine learning tools that can make, there's a lot of advancements in that front, and those tools and advancements are making definite inroads onto test teams. What manual folks do today is more and more that can be done by machine. And that's great, right? Like, let the machines find more of the bugs and get better test coverage, get better code coverage, all that kind of stuff. Do we feel that QA folks need to worry about the value that they bring to organizations? And Kirk mentioned this earlier. No, but only if we evolve. And, we need to, as automation is making advancements, manual testers and in the art of manual testing also needs to evolve. Because with this new time saving that we get by having machines do more and more for us, is it gives us the time and the chance to really connect with the end user and be able to build empathy and think about the application or the process of bringing things through the testing cycles, and really thinking about how we can optimize this for the end user, bring the end user perspective earlier on here into the mix, well before the customer sees it in production, right? Or even before UAT and things like that. So we're going to get into some manual testing techniques. Now, it's important for us to note here, the ones I can highlight in today's webinar is just a small portion of what Humanual testing can bring to the table. I chose 3 kind of different things because they can bring some immediate value to a lot of organizations, and they span quite a variety of different types for different skill sets, different needs at different organizations, stuff like that. But this is not, as I mentioned, not a prescribed process. So, if you're really into specific methodologies with very clear definitions and very common wording, right, that's applied to everyone who lives in that framework or in that methodology, this could be a little frustrating because we're not at that stage with Humanual testing. That's not what this is about. But I do want to give some concrete things to actually absorb and take away and do. So hang with me if you feel like it's a bit too loosey-goosey so far. So we're going to be looking at, in these techniques, user-centric reporting and some guided ideation. But we're going to start off with using personas, because these are a very effective way to build empathy and really be able to get into the head of your end users. So I'm going to let people take a quick look at the screen. And obviously, it's just a bit of a play on the topic to have a thought bubble kind of representing what's going through the mind of this particular character, this particular user. But the intention here was to show and to build some kind of empathy, right? Like, you can kind of get some of the reaction that he's feeling of personas. That's not new. That's not something that you guys made up in your Humanual testing thing. Hogwash, right? It's intentional to kind of do that, because we admit it's not a new concept. Personas have been around for a long time, but our application here is a bit different. See, normally personas have been part of the business or even VAs, and they're used to help justify features, to be able to give a new spin on how different users interact and how to prioritize features. And those are all great uses for personas. We're not taking any of that away, but we're just seeing opportunity to where these can be built into the QA space as well for a bit of a different purpose. So just a bit more background. So personas are fictional characters, and they usually represent the users in more specific and real ways to give you more empathy with a particular user or customer demographic. So we have a question here: are personas like use cases? Very well could be. So use case, again, is not a standard term that every organization uses differently. So I might come back to that question a little bit after we kind of talk about our application of personas here, and then see if it ties into how you're using the term use case. I think there is application there, right? If your use case is meant to build empathy and you use language like, as a, systems analyst, I need to, right? There are some overlaps there in application, but let's come back to that question just a little bit. So typically with personas, we fill out a couple different ones to represent the different customer segments, right? Or to try and get some variety on the humanness of what our folks bring to the, or what our users bring into the application when they go to use it. And that is the primary goal here of personas, is to build empathy, get inside the head of the user. So I have a couple of examples to show. Not that these are the only two templates you could use by any means, but two examples. So this one, you can see a bit more of a corporate look and feel. And this one's good for getting inside the head, or at least understanding like the job function of a specifically like kind of role-based user better, right? Like say you're building a portal that's going to be used by, you know, different people in different roles wanting different things. So this lets you take that, okay, this brand partner role is going to be using the portal. Here's a character, here's a persona of a brand partner. And you can see some of the personality traits. You can see some motivations. You can see the goals, the roles and responsibilities and frustrations. And the goal here is that once you read, you know, you get in the head, you think through these things, you take this and you read it, it can really help you write better test cases and write test cases that you may never have thought to write if you didn't kind of better experience, you know, the mindset of Sicily here. And so I know that, you know, the QA people on the call are kind of like, I can't write test cases based off of this. I agree, right? This is not enough to give you information to write test cases, because we all have requirements docs, user stories, different things that we use for more requirements gathering. But this is, again, an additional layer that should help you come up with more flows, or help you prioritize your flows into what you really think they need to get right, like what really needs to be tested from a priority standpoint going into the next phase, or the handoff, or the demonstration, you know, whatever your next level is. So let's go into the next template. You know, definite look and feel different here. This one, not so corporate, not so role-based, much more human, you know, like a very real human at the end of it that we're keeping in mind. Probably more applicable for, like, you know, using a website or downloading an app, right? Like this is more of a general public type thing, but you want to get some of the defined characteristics or kind of different flavors of type of person kind of incorporated with some different, you know, for different purposes. So this particular template has a bit of an origin story. So I want to share that just to give some better example. So we had a client who, you know, makes chatbots for destination and event websites, and they reached out to us to help them think of some new ways to test their bots, because they were doing it in probably fairly traditional methods, functional testing, and the test passed, right? Like the test that they ran at it, like it rendered on the page correctly, it worked, cross-browser testing all worked. And the questions that they're asking it, because it would scrape the website to kind of, you know, learn everything it could. You train these bots, and the testers would ask questions. It would get the answers right because that was what it was trained from the website. And they'd have higher level of confidence going in with this. They'd launch in production and find out that the users actually didn't like it, and they were shutting it down, going back into searching manually on the page, stuff like that. So what our solution was, to make a long story kind of shorter, we developed this persona template idea and said, all right, let's think of some different types of folks coming that will be engaging with the site, right? So this is being launched on a zoo. Let's think of different types of people, not just who go to the zoo, but people who would look online to research a zoo before they go, and who would ask questions, right? So a school teacher, maybe someone with accessibility needs, maybe a person on a date needing to, you know, make a good impression. So we developed personas around these types of characters, and then gave these to testers to ask really detailed questions from the mindset of that particular persona, And that could really uncover the shortcomings because the bot didn't know the answers. So then they could retrain the bot based off of the perspective and the information that we were asking it. And then when they launched again, they'd have a much higher success rate because they were trained better based off of real people's needs. Cool. So again, I know that was a lot of information moving really fast, but please jump in with questions or a type of question. There is a question here. Can it be compared to usability testing? So is the question, can Humanual testing be compared to usability testing? I would say parts of it for sure, but our Humanual testing is much broader. There are pieces here as we go over the next, these three techniques and dive more into personas that really don't have much to do with usability in the traditional sense. But with the user focus and person-centered approach, usability testing absolutely fits into the scope of Humanual testing. So hopefully that helped answer the question, but we'll keep going a little bit and see if you want me to clarify, I'd be happy to do it. So this exercise that we're going to do next is, it's again, this is just fun, but hopefully also educational, trying to show you how you can get in trouble with personas that aren't done correctly, right? We gave two examples of two different types of personas that are the right way, we feel. Not that they're the only way, but there are some problems you can get into too. So let's say, just envision this person for me. I gave you a persona and I said, all right, here's some facts. This person was born in 1947. They were married multiple times. They own multiple residences. They worked in New York City. They're deeply spiritual. They're rich and successful. They're a parent, and they've been controversial. Like, okay. So, whoever you have in mind, I don't know if it matches up closely or not, but all these facts do apply to the famous chef Paula Deen, right? Like, okay, great. However, all these facts that I just said also are true for famous rocker David Bowie. And I don't know that, that was really helpful. If you're thinking about who's going to interact with your site, like it could be Paula Deen or David Bowie or a lot of other people. I don't know that it was really helpful because we stayed too surfacey. We gave you some facts about this person and okay, what about those facts influences the way they engage with your site, right? It probably it wasn't really the right kind of information that we gave. So we're gonna do the same thing one more time, another risk point. So I'm gonna read the facts to you. Male in their upper 30s. They skipped college to stay close to home. They had great success at work early on, but declined noticeably in later years. They're criticized for having a higher salary than probably worth. Underwent a major job change at 30, not a promotion, but a lateral move. And stopped working when 35 for medical health reasons. So, again, the way I phrased those facts may have painted an inaccurate picture of the person. All these things apply to Minnesota Twins superstar Joe Mauer. Now, as a state, we may have mixed feelings about that superstar status, but do you see, my point here is that it's important to get your phraseology right when we build personas because negative connotations or the way that you word things in vague terms can really paint an unintended consequence of who we're trying to represent. So instead, we want to encourage people when they're building personas to use neutral or mildly positive language. We want to only provide scope and background that's relevant. Like these facts about Joe Mauer don't really help understand, his site usage or what what you need to get out of a persona doesn't really provide. We want to tie the information you're providing isn't like for fun. It's not easy reading. It's meant to tie back to the project, give you information about what do we want to avoid here? What frustrations might they have that I want to make sure I don't incorporate those into my product, right? So that's the goal of personas, is to provide the right kind of information and don't remain too surfacey or negative in the way you do it. Okay, so Humanual testing tip number 2 that we're going to talk about is user-centric reporting. And there's 2 flavors to this. So if we get really good at using personas and that becomes adopted across the organization, and you can go as far as to have metrics that say this is how many of our users, this is a percentage of users that kind of fit this persona type or this demographic, or this is our most profitable demographic. It can help you with the severity or the prioritization of issues that you're finding or test cases that you're going to run, right? Like it's basically kind of prioritizing based off of good data that you have showing you where to invest the most of your time, right? Who needs the best experience here. But the other way, just for anyone to consider, is just in our daily application of our life. Usually when we're on projects, not necessarily all of us do this every week, but a lot of us write weekly status reports. And a lot of us probably got that status report template from SharePoint or maybe Confluence, and it's just been the way that you do it. You inherited it from someone else, right? Whoever made the initiative to make a status report standard for your Center of Excellence a long time ago. And there's nothing wrong with that per se. If it's doing the trick and everyone's on board with it, that's great. But what I would ask you is, do you feel like no one's reading it? Do you feel like it's taking a chunk out of your Friday afternoon and it doesn't really get the attention it deserves, or like it's worth the time investing it? And so what I would also ask the question then to your audience is like, is it giving you the information that you want, right? Like different stakeholders at organizations have very different interests and motivations to learn about the project status from very different angles, right? So like PMs are very interested in burn down and milestone completion percentages, right? They just want to know some of that information. QA managers might want to have a better feel for risk assessment and other things that PMs don't necessarily track in the same way. And stakeholders maybe don't want like very convoluted metrics and all kinds of reports showing you how many defects have been reopened after they were closed the first time, right? They just want to know, how's it going? So you have to think about your audience to really tailor a report for them. So my tips here is that you would define the user type. And again, there can be multiple people, so you have to adjust your reporting based off of how many of these things qualify. But is it the PM? Is it the QA manager? Is it the executive sponsor? Think about how they use the information, right? Is it updating some Microsoft project with completion percentages, or is it they want to scrutinize for risk, or they want to read the summary, or what's their motivation for reading it? And finally, it's important is, how do they interact with the information? Are they going to view it on their phone while they're in a different meeting? Because that's a very different format than wanting to like click in and get granular, right? And be able to trace back, like you say, there's red here and there's failure. What all is it impacting? Where is it stemming from? How many requirements are involved, right? These are all things that would go into your status report that I would think you should consider the next time you have an opportunity to introduce change, before you just reach for that SharePoint template that's just there, right? So, all right, moving on. So, and the final technique that we'll talk about, not that exists, but that we'll talk about today in the time that we have, is a little bit of guided ideation and the how might we technique. So one thing that humans really bring to the table and you can't automate is good ideas. So hopefully either you or people on your team, enough people on your team, are really good idea people. And there's techniques to be able to flesh out, more and more ideas. There's different forms of brainstorming, body storming, mind mapping, brain writing. And there's numerous things to try to see what your team is most successful with. But one thing that seems to work well for a lot of the QA teams that I work with is the how might we technique, because it's guided and it's a bit easier for not just the free spirits of the world, but also us QA people to really identify with. So here's an example of how this works. So I worked at a client that did on-demand manufacturing. It was an enormous legacy system. There's tons of integration, a lot of workflows involved. And a lot of the stuff in the middle of those workflows were, you know, when the system steps are being done at the warehouse level, right? Like they have to go update their stuff, picking inventory, parts, all that kind of stuff. And so when you're testing this, and I think most testers will identify, when we're running these long flows like that, we're not in a physical warehouse. We're not actually picking real parts. We have to fake it all. So we get really good at knowing just what information can I put into these sections to get it to pass, right? And so we get good at that, we test it that way. And then in this case, when we brought the actual system to UAT or involved the users, they would say, this doesn't work the way I need it to work. Like I get it the way that you guys plugged in data in QA got the screen to pass, but it's not how we actually do it. And they were having terrible usability issues. So it took a couple of sessions of working together in collaboration and doing some, hey, how might we, fix this problem, and getting some good ideas from across the different teams to be able to come up with some really good stuff that actually fixed the problem, right? Some of that was doing some day in the life scenarios. Some of that was just understanding, the QA folks needing to understand how they actually needed to pick parts and how they actually had dependencies on stock issues and things like that, so that we could actually write real, more authentic test cases than what we were doing before we involved the how might we technique. All right. So again, I have said we've given all the props we can to design thinking, so we're going to do that a little bit more. The beauty of design thinking is that it's the person first approach. So there's a lot of good stuff in the methodology, slash mindset slash framework that is design thinking. It's, again, design thinking is not this crystal clear implementation thing, right, that other organizations offer. And while it's awesome and powerful and can be applied to the whole product lifecycle and SDLC, not all of it is totally easily relatable to just the testing process. So we thought it would be a good adaptation of bringing what the application of design thinking brings, converting it to more QA-centric understanding, and that is what launched Humanual Testing. But we also recognize that we don't want to cheapen the full value that design thinking brings. So I want to make sure we talk about all 5 stages of design thinking, and so you can kind of see the relation of the whole. Because if an organization does design thinking really well across the life cycle, and the testers are employing these Humanual testing techniques, you're going to have an awesome software product at the end of that, and that's really cool. All right, so the design thinking paradigm shift. Let's describe it this way. In the traditional software development mindset, the focus has been on building the thing right. So some of the metrics that some attendees gave about past completion rates, right, and things like that, lack of defects, that's still relevant and awesome. And it has to be there as definitely a foundation for QA. And that's traditional, right? Like quality is measured internally on the test passing and the low defect counts and the high level of success with functional flows. But the paradigm shift here is that success is measured now on building the right thing. Quality is measured externally by direct user feedback and the value that's being delivered to customers. So definitely an important, change that one word around or the order of things. And it's a different, maybe subtle, but important distinction. So also just want to call out a couple attributes that are recognized as being really important for design thinking. And these attributes are the deeper helpfulness here is that to think about your organization, right, and your culture. And do these things flourish at your culture, or which ones of them need some improvement for design thinking to really be able to make the most impact? So you need to have a good sense of and allow for empathy, right? Feeling other perspectives. You need to be non-judgmental. Your team needs to be okay with being creative and throwing ideas out there, and they might not be implemented, but maybe that idea sparks a good idea. We need to be okay with ambiguity, right? We're not black and white, cut and dry. Humans are not built that way, so we can't think of all testing activities that has to, is that way either. We need to be holistic. We need to look outside just the QA team to understand different perspectives and the whole. We need to be constructive in our feedback, and we need to collaborate with each other. This is not meant to be an exercise that QA teams go and do off on their own. They're meant to employ techniques to work with others to make sure we're doing this for the user, but working together to get there. So this here is the most commonly kind of recognized model of design thinking. It's non-linear, right? So I don't want this to paint the image of here's the steps that you go through one by one, and we're on stage 3 of our journey. Like, no, if you're design thinking, you're not at a stage and you're not maturing to the next stage. That's not how it works. These are 5 different mindsets that take you through a journey, but there's going to be backups. There's going to be fast forwards. You're going to go back. It's meant to go in and out of these stages to get to an awesome final product. So we're going to go into each one of these stages at just a little more detail here than we currently have covered. But empathy, again, empathy is huge. So we talked about empathy in the form of like personas being a good way to get inside the end users. It's not the only way. There's empathy maps, customer interviews, body language analysis that you can have done of watching people interact with the system kind of behind the, behind the curtain kind of stuff. So all that can really help you understand how users feel about your system. So Maya Angelou famously said, "I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel," right? And so it's a powerful quote, and I'm hesitant a little bit to kind of cheapen that by applying it to our topic at hand, but it's an important truism that the feeling you get stays with you. And if you have a bad user experience that trying to download an ebook from the library and it takes 20 minutes and you end up not getting it, like it leaves you upset. You have a quick and easy transaction that gets your new water filter like ordered to your door like a day away. Like, it's a good feeling. So the goal here is just that those feelings that your systems and your apps kind of invoke are very important, and they stay with people. The define stage. So there's really 2 parts of the define stage here, and they definitely relate, but they're also very different. So the analysis and the synthesis, right? So the analysis part, we're pretty used to that in the QA space, is that we break down these kind of complex concepts into smaller and easier to absorb and easier to use chunks. But synthesis is like the flip side of that. So we have to take all these pieces together to kind of form whole ideas. So there's a technique that design thinking brings to the table. And we could have covered this more as a Humanual testing technique, but we just, we didn't for the sake of time mostly. But opportunity statement writing, or you may have heard it called problem statements. So it's a way of, there's a structure to this to really take a challenge. So you build an empathy, right? Kind of define, or from the lens of a certain user or a certain role, you then approach an opportunity, and then you state your desired outcome, right? And the sentence, when put together, can be a powerful kind of tool to then spurn additional like solutioning and how do we accomplish that? Sounds good. How do we accomplish that? And so that's a cool thing that in the define stage of design thinking. Next we have ideate. So some people don't like this word, or ideation. It sounds kind of made up, like a buzzword. It's actually been around for a long time, and it's an important concept. Again, back to the power of what humans can bring to the table that other people can't. Linus Pauling, who's a brilliant Nobel Prize winning, I think, biochemist, had a saying that was, the best way to have a good idea is to have a lot of ideas, right? And this is someone who's not in the arts. This is a scientist, right? Who's saying, start, getting your ideas out there to see where they lead. So anyway, a cool phase, right? All that brainstorming, the how might we techniques kind of come back to this phase of design thinking. These next two is where it gets a little bit trickier to apply to our worlds in the QA and testing space. Remember that design thinking has been around for actually a long time, and it actually has some deep roots in manufacturing. So there's concepts that design thinking shares, or kind of derive out of each other, like lean concepts, the minimum viable product, and fail fast. And those are really useful concepts for their industries. We don't typically use those terms in our world as much. I mean, wireframing is one example of kind of prototypes that before you invest in a higher fidelity type of proof of concept, you might start with some wireframes first to get some general feedback. Again, we want feedback loops is key here in design thinking. But you also think of it from beyond the wireframing stages, but how can you use the concept of prototype, which is get something in front of people to get feedback, right? Like, what's the least amount of investment I can make to find out if my idea is worth exploring or if it should be scrapped? We're okay with failure in design thinking. Failing fast is great if that's what needs to happen. There's waste, not all waste is bad, right? So, whether it's from evaluating a new tool, a new process, a new way to do end-to-end testing, lots of application where you may not be doing a physical prototype, a physical mock-up, but the idea of just the call to action. Design thinking favors action, and we're going to try this out and see what we can learn and be okay with it failing is kind of the point I'm trying to hit home here. And lastly, test. This is not how we do test in our QA world. We're not looking for defects here. What we're looking for is feedback based on our prototype. So we want to figure out how people feel about our product, and the feedback that we get will drive what happens next, right? Like, is it a scrapper idea? Is it a improve upon idea? Does it need more ideation to tweak it? Does it just need, what happens next really is based off the feedback, both positive and negative, and test is the place where we get that feedback from. All right, so next steps. We will be sending out a quick start guide with tips coming up fairly soon, right, Kirk? Do you want to talk about the timing of that a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. So as I believe we mentioned on the registration page of the webinar, we do have this quick start guide. It is something we've posted to our website, but we'll also send a link to that along with the link to this recording as well. And it really is just it gives us an opportunity to take a look at what aspects of design thinking, Humanual testing, would fit into your organization. So where human-centered design is applicable and relevant to almost every organization, it may differ depending on your organization as well, of course. So we talk in here about different types of projects that might be great to start with Humanual testing. Josh, you actually just did a blog on this week on our website in our Knowledge Center.
Yeah, yep, it is. So we definitely wanted to leave some, kind of, hey, great information, but what next kind of thinking. So look for that for, again, more detail than we have time to cover right now, but just what it's going to do is help kind of say, a good time to try out this or any new initiative is like a pilot project, right? Especially in an area where functional testing is having a hard time really yielding good results, giving a good product, things like that. And so this should be a helpful way to kind of carry this the information presented into a more practical next step for you and your organization. But we definitely don't want to spend the whole time talking. We want to get some of your thoughts and be able to answer questions that folks have. So please do feel free to let us know if we can help.
Yeah, and I just wanted to share our contact info, and I'll put the slide back up again. But thank you again. And again, if you have any questions specifically on Humanual testing that we don't cover in our Q&A section, I mean, feel free to take down our contact info. You can always check us out, of course, at tapqa.com. We have a whole section in our Knowledge Center dedicated to Humanual testing that we've produced over the past month, and we will also be posting this recording there as well. So with that, let's open it up for a Q&A. Josh, I did have a couple of questions, I believe I sent you, that came to us before we started our session today. And there were a couple from the chat room earlier. One that I wanted to cover right off the bat, and this came from Philip, is how does Humanual testing, how can we best use that technique or series of techniques in our world of CI/CD, where we go from, idea to we do a much quicker job of getting things into production. How does Humanual testing have a place in that world?
Well, a couple different angles, I think. I mean, one is, back to the techniques, right? With just the human-centered reporting, right? Like, is the way that you're displaying your automation results and passes or nightly deploys, right? Are you accurately portraying information to decision makers, people who need to act on that? So it's just something to think about, right? Like, I know we're giving this information because it's meaningful to us from how many tests pass, but is it useful for your audience? So just think about that part of it a little bit. Beyond that, it's just a bit harder to give you a direct answer, right? Because a lot of the work that we're talking about with the personas, right, are spurring additional test cases. And you're gonna have better quality applications based off of kind of that new angle of looking at things, but it's up to your team to determine which of these are automation candidates, right? Like, which ones of these should be built into your pipeline for, and what are the weights going to be and how often they get run and how important they are. So you have to think through some of that. I mostly see an increase in quality test cases, more relevant test cases, and then it's kind of up to your org to determine how you incorporate that into the automation initiatives, if that helps answer the question.
No, that's great, Josh. I know we're coming up at the top of the hour, and I know, Josh, you in particular, I think you have another meeting, but I do want to cover one more question, and that is with managers who are very experienced and keep talking about quality metrics, and we've seen that some of those are just not very useful and will continue to get less useful, I think, as quality engineering organizations evolve. What would be the best way to convince them to think from a user perspective when it comes to those quality metrics and how we measure success?
Well, yeah, good question. Very, a bit philosophical in nature. I think part of it is just they have to understand the direction that where QA teams are heading. There's been that evolution that we've talked about. We're not trying to be, point out the danger of Skynet coming in 20 years. Like, we're saying we're kind of there, right? Like, a lot of companies now are measuring their success based off of customer feedback and not the more outdated kind of internal metrics. There's a place for those, to be sure, but it's not enough anymore to say that you're really doing a good job of providing value and providing quality software without that piece of customer satisfaction being built in my opinion.
Great. And it's like again, since we are at the top of the hour, we would love to get more questions from you as time goes on, of course, or if you have anything that's immediately at the top of your mind, we'd love to answer those directly over email. Again, we will be sending out a recording of this presentation as soon as it processes, as well as that quick start guide for Humanual testing. And again, we encourage you to check out our Knowledge Center as well for a whole slew of content around Humanual testing. So Josh, any last thoughts before we wrap up?
Well, I think, like anything, it takes a champion for ideas to get traction at organizations, and the fact that you're all here, I think, hopefully you found some information useful, kind of saw the value in adopting some of these things. So again, if we can empower you with more information, and we're trying to do that with some of this quick start guide, but if additional conversation is kind of what you need to be able to sell this better and really, brainstorm together on how we can get more people into this, right? What do we need to do to show the value? We'd love to talk with you about that and kind of get you to be that champion at your organization.
Exactly. And this is something Humanual testing and design thinking, we do a significant amount of training and consulting around. So would love to talk to you if you'd like to have a head start or a jump start, if you will, of bringing this into your organization. tapQA can help with that. We'd love to chat with you further. Certainly, as we have our follow-up emails, feel free to reply back to us with that. So with that, I will wish you all a very happy Thursday and a happy weekend as you are getting closer to the end of your summer, and it really pains me to say that, of course, but really appreciate having you here today. Again, thanks for attending our session, and we'll have follow-ups for you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.